I'm an English teacher. On May 2nd, I will celebrate my 20th anniversary of teaching in New York City public schools. And the reason I chose to become an English teacher to begin with is because I love story. I believe storytelling is the backbone of civilization. I think that we learn about people and experiences and cultures and so forth through the art of the narrative. And I am also a huge music lover. My musical taste is pretty old, actually. I know I'm pretty known for loving Ariana Grande, and I do. But believe it or not, the core of my music taste is actually stuff that came out well before I was born. So, in an effort to combine two of my great loves, which is storytelling and music, I have come up with a list for our first official Top 10 Tuesday, which is Top 10 Songs That Tell a Story. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to say this. If you are a subscriber of mine and you're watching this video, thank you so much for your support. If you are finding this video by happenstance, accident, or whatever, and you like what you see, well, please subscribe to my channel and click the notifications bell so that you can be alerted when a new video comes out. We've got Top 10 Tuesdays, we've got Self-Care Sundays, and we've got all of the other videos and vlogs that come in between those two things. So, I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for. And now, with no further ado, let's get into our list, shall we? What are the top 10 songs ever, according to me, that tell a story? Well, if you'd like to know the answer to that, if you're anxious to get to this list, well then don't worry, because this very first episode of Top 10 Tuesdays starts right now. I'd like you to know, before we go any further, that I poured over this list. Okay, I stopped and started it so many times, and I asked for input, and somebody told me some songs that I had forgotten about, and I was like, oh no, where am I going to squeeze that one? Can it be a top 50? You know, and yeah, I did my homework there. I had to recopy my list for you guys because I actually had one that was so messed up that I couldn't refer to it on camera because I'd crossed stuff out and like rearranged the numbers so many times that I couldn't just glance down and speak to you, you know, how to prepare a better list. So, with no further ado, let us get to our story songs. I have Pepsi in my hippie band cup, as I have before, but not in a while. And so let's get right down to it, shall we? Now, the number 10 song is a song that you can make fun of me for liking all you want, but I've seen it live. I've loved it all my life, and it's Copacabana by Barry Manilow. Now, it's a dance tune. You're supposed to be happy when you listen to it, but it's an awfully tragic love story. You see, once upon a time, there was Lola. She was a showgirl with yellow feathers in her hair and a dress cut down to there. And there was Tony, who was the bartender. And the two of them worked at the Copacabana. And they were a couple, and they were young and in love, and they would go to the club at night, and they would sleep by day and repeat the procedure the next night, and everything was wonderful. Until our antagonist entered the picture. His name was Rico. He wore a diamond. He was escorted to his chair. He saw Lola dancing there. And when she finished, he called her over. Here's where our story gets hairy. Rico went a bit too far. Tony sailed across the bar, and then the punches flew, and chairs were smashed in two. There was blood and a single gunshot, but just who shot who? Well, in the third verse, after dancing to Copacabana for some time, we learn that it was poor Tony who got the bullet. Because Lola, now at the age of 60, and 60 was so much older years ago, 60 was like 80, well, she sits at the Copacabana every night, drinking herself half blind, as Barry Manilow says, and she's crazy. She lost her youth, she lost her Tony, now she's lost her mind. What a sad tale. We danced to this stuff. I know, I danced to it. My parents and I saw Barry Manilow live at the Barclays Center in 2015, and it was crazy good, and we were all standing in the audience at the end of the show when he closed with Copacabana, and I was like 30 years too young to be there, but it didn't matter, and it was just a really cool thing. Well, Number 9 is a hell of a lot more amusing of a song, actually. And it's a really cool tale. And it came out in 1968, and it is by Jeannie C. Riley. And the song is Harper Valley PTA. It's a pretty interesting tale. You see, there's a young woman who's a widow, and her name is Mrs. Johnson. And she has a daughter who's in middle school. And one day her daughter comes home a little upset because she's been handed a note by the PTA of her school. And the note says, Mrs. Johnson, you're wearing your dresses way too high. It's reported you've been drinking and running around with men and going wild. And we don't believe you ought to be bringing up your little girl this way. Well, Mrs. Johnson is not going to take that lying down. And there's a PTA meeting that day, so she goes to it. And she basically calls out all the people on the PTA. And she talks about what hypocrites they are. She says, well, there's Bobby Taylor sitting there, and 7 times he's asked me for a date. And Mrs. Taylor sure seems to use a lot of ice whenever he's away. Years ago, your ice was delivered, and your milk was delivered, and your paper was delivered. So, this the old joke of like, oh, the kids look like the milkman. She's like, and Mr. Harper couldn't be here because he stayed too long at Kelly's bar again. And if you smell Shirley Thompson's breath, you'll find she's had a little nip of gin. And you have the nerve to tell me you think that as a mother I'm not fit? Well, this is just a little Peyton Place, and you're all Harper Valley hypocrites. All right. Now, for those of you younger viewers, Peyton Place ran from 1964 to 1970 on TV. It was actually our first official nighttime soap. It was our first nighttime drama show, and it was like Game of Thrones popular, But there was no DVR or VCR. You couldn't tape it. You had to like literally be home and watch it, and people did. People stopped going out to dinner. Like it was like a thing. Did you see Peyton Place? And so, Harper Valley PTA. This woman, Mrs. Johnson, calls out all the people who are calling her an unfit mother because of her lifestyle, because she's a young widow and she's probably trying to meet another man, and she's got a miniskirt on, and it's 1968, and she goes out to boogie and drink, and just being a person. And she's like, well, you guys are no better than I am, so what are you talking about, And it turns out at the end, it's her mom. She goes, it's the day my mama socked it to the Harper Valley PTA. I love that. I think it's adorable. And it's just such a cute story, and that's why it's number 9. Now, number 8 is a little more wistful and sad than that. It came out in 72. It is by The Looking Glass, and it is called Brandi. Now, here's the thing about Brandi. Brandi is a woman who works as a waitress in a bar in a town that is filled with sailors. It's a port town, and she is dating one of them. Okay, it says Brandi wears a silver chain, a braided chain, made of finest silver from the north of Spain, a locket that bears the name of the man that Brandi loves. So, this man is a sailor. He said, he left. He said he made it clear he couldn't stay. The harbor was his home. He said, Brandi, you're a fine girl. What a good wife you would be. But my life, my love, and my lady is the sea. And all of the guys in the town do that. And Brandi is pretty much screwed if she wants a commitment of any kind, because basically all she's going to meet is sailors, and and the song goes on to say that she's basically pretty lonely. It says, at night when the bars close down, Brandi walks through a silent town and loves a man who's not around, Now, if I were Brandi, I'd take my tip money, get on the Greyhound bus, and get the hell out of the town, but then there wouldn't be a song called Brandi, so and it's a lovely story, and it makes it to number 8 on my countdown, and it's just really cool, and I suggest you check it out. Now, number 7 is a song by Billy Joel. Billy Joel appears later in our countdown as well. Now, this song is a song that makes me cry. It doesn't make me cry because it's depressing to my life. It doesn't make me cry because it reminds me of myself. Just cry because it's so beautiful. And the story is so incredibly well woven, and the song is The Ballad of Billy the Kid. The song is the last track on the Piano Man album, and it is absolutely spectacular, and it begins with the tale of Billy the Kid, who Billy Joel didn't know. Okay, he made it up. He said, from a town known as Wheeling, West Virginia, rode a boy with a 6-gun in his hand, and his daring life of crime made him a legend in his time, east and west of the Rio Grande. And Billy Joel has been interviewed. He said he didn't know anything about Billy the Kid. He made it up, and he hoped he was right. He robbed his way from Utah to Oklahoma, and the law just couldn't seem to track him down. And basically, it was true. Billy the Kid was 16 or 17 or whatever, and he basically robbed his way through the whole West, until eventually he got hung for his crimes. One day a posse captured Billy, and the law said string him up for what he did. So there he goes. Now, earlier in the song, Billy Joel had said he never traveled heavy, and he always rode alone, and he soon put many other guns to shame. And he never had a sweetheart, and he never had a home, but the cowboy and the rancher knew his name. Now, fine, okay? So here's the point where this person starts crying and can't sing it out loud when she's cleaning her house because she gets tear voice and it breaks. It's that, he dies. Obviously, he's hung for his cry. And it says, and he, again, he goes, and he never traveled heavy, and he always rode alone, and he soon put many other guns to shame. And he says, and he never had a sweetheart, but he finally found a home underneath the Boot Hill grave that bears his name. I'm a huge end-of-life activist person, you know what I mean? Like, I believe that your end-of-life care and your funeral requirements and everything that you deem fit should be honored, that your last send-off should be what you want, and that you should have a marker. Even when I see a dead cat in the street that's been run over, I'm like, I want to bury it and put his name up because he lived. He was here on Earth. I'm really, really big on that. Where, like, if you were alive on Earth, I don't care if you were a son of a bitch and shot people. Okay, I don't care if you stab me. Okay, you're still a human, and you're entitled to a marker because you're gone now, but you were here. Okay, and Billy the Kid has a Boot Hill grave that bears his name, and that's why I cry. And then I cry more because Billy Joel goes on to say, from a town known as Oyster Bay, Long Island, rode a boy with a six-pack in his hand. Billy Joel is from Long Island. And the fact that he wove together the two Billies, and the fact that he ends the story in that manner and likens himself to it, I cry. I've said that, 3 times now? I'll say it again, I cry. Because it's just one of the most beautifully woven stories. It's not personal to me. I don't live in the Old West. I don't even live in Oyster Bay. But holy shitballs. It's just fantastic. And so that's why the Ballad of Billy the Kid takes the number 7 spot. Now the number 6 spot, I believe, is probably the best story for teaching metaphor or understanding metaphor that there ever was on our planet. Okay? And it is a song by Kenny Rogers. And it is The Gambler. We've all heard that one. You've got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, know when to run. You never count your money when you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. Right? And everybody knows that old, chorus. But who among us remembers the verses? Who remembers the stories? Okay? This man, boards a train at night, and he's sitting next to an old gambler. And the guy says, son, I've made my life out of reading people's faces and knowing what the cards were before, by the way they held their eyes. And if you don't mind me saying, I can see you're out of aces, And so he gives him some advice. He drank the last of the man's, whiskey. He said he drank down his last swallow. Then he bummed a cigarette and asked him for a light. And he sat in the train back when you could smoke on the train. And he, after he finished off his whiskey, he began smoking, and he told him, you gotta know when to hold him and fold him and whatnot, right? He says, every gambler knows that the secret to surviving is knowing what to throw away and knowing what to keep. Because every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser. And he goes about telling him this, metaphor for life, about how life is a gamble, And we're into this story about this young man sitting with this older man who's, why would you take advice from this guy? He's just an old gambler, but yet, he might be a degenerate. He doesn't even have his own cigarettes and whiskey. But, he paid the man back for his substances and really sound life advice that likens life to a gamble. And finally, he says, crushed out a cigarette and faded off to sleep. And he says, and somewhere in the darkness, the gambler, he broke even. And in his final words, I found an ace that I could keep. And so the story is a story of 2 generations of men sitting strangers on a train, and the young man comes away better for his experience from having sat and listened to the narrative of the older man, the gambler, right? There'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. He learned that, and he gets off the train a different man, because he met this fellow, and that's the gambler, and that's why it's number 6. Well, We're halfway through our countdown now, and I'd like to say that the number 5 and 4 spots are by the same artist. There was no way I could avoid it. This artist made, I should say, he's not with us anymore, made his living telling stories in song. And he actually was a pretty darn good genius at making songs that were stories that were circular, where you start at a point A, you go to A, B, C, D, blah, 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 and you wind up at A again. You know, a circular story, a story that weaves itself back to the beginning. And that song, or the first of 2 songs, is Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. My parents played that album of Harry Chapin live so often. Oh my God, from the time I was like 2 until, I guess, 3 years ago, you know? So, Cats in the Cradle is the story of a father and a son, and the concept of spending time with your loved ones, or not spending time with your loved ones. He says, my child arrived just the other day. You know, he says there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. You know, this fella has a job, you know, that requires him to be out of the house often or away on business and what have you. And he's making a living, and I guess his wife is raising his son, you know, and he doesn't see his son all that often. Son becomes 10, right? He gets him baseball stuff. He says, thanks for the ball, Dad. Come on, let's play. Or a basketball or whatever. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today. I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay. And the son was rebuffed by his father, you know, when he was 10 for playing a game of ball. And because he was accustomed to it, because his dad wasn't around so much, right? And so, of course, this is a circular story. It weaves itself into a circle, right? So now he goes, well, I've long since retired. My son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. Now, I think you might know where I'm going with this. It's a circular story. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle, and the kids have the flu, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you. And this is where the lesson is learned. This is where the narrative comes back to haunt him, and he gets the circular story, and he realizes, he says, and as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me. He'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. So the irony is that he got exactly what he wanted. You know, he said, you know, when you're coming home, son, I don't know when. It changed to when you're coming home, Dad, right? Because this boy grew up being an absentee son, just as his dad was an absentee dad, never having time for him, and it came back to bite him in the butt, right? Now, I actually like number 4 better. I love Cats in the Cradle, don't get me wrong. And it's a beautiful story, but I absolutely love the next song that is also by Harry Chapin, and it's number 4, and it's called Taxi. I listened to it just last night to prepare for this video, and I played it twice because I was just like, oh my God, I hadn't heard it in some time. And Taxi is another circular story. It is a story of this guy. He's like, you know, it was raining hard in Frisco. I needed one more fare to make my night. A lady up ahead waved and flagged me down, and she got in at the light. Got a taxi driver. He's about to close his shift. He needs to make another fare. Here's a lady, right? And she's all dressed up in a gown as if she'd been to some event, right? And she stares at the window, doesn't really say much to him, tells him her address, and he drives along, right? And he's looking. He says, something about her face was familiar. I could swear I'd seen her face before. And she said, I'm sure you're mistaken. And she didn't say anything more. Well, it comes out that this girl, this woman that's in the back of his cab, had been his girlfriend. Years ago, he says, it was long ago in a fairy tale. I used to drive her home in my car. And we learned about love in the back of a Dodge. It was a lesson that had gone too far. And they didn't work out, right? They broke up because she was going to be an actress and he was going to learn to fly. Okay, and those were their dreams, and so they didn't stay together. They went off and pursued their own lives, and they didn't stay together when they were young. Well, it's obvious that he didn't learn to fly, because there he is driving a taxi, right? And whether or not she's an actress is remains to be seen, but we know that she's going home to a very fancy address, and that she's wearing fancy clothes. She could just be a rich man's wife. Who the hell knows, you know? And so he drives her home in the rain, and he says, I passed the gates and the fine trimmed lawn. And then, of course, the obligatory, oh, we must see each other again comes up, you know. She said, we must get together, but I knew it would never be arranged. And she handed me $20 for a $2.50 fare and said, Harry, keep the change. right? And so he says another man might have been angry or hurt, but he just took the money and put it in his pocket, and and he drove away, thinking how strange it was that they both got what they'd asked for a long time ago, right? Okay, she was going to be an actress. He was going to learn to fly. That was the premise, right? So he says, well, here she's acting happy inside her handsome home. And me, I'm flying in my taxi, taking tips and getting stoned. And that's the end of the story. And so what we're supposed to take away from the story is the fact that it's, first of all, ironic as all hell, as was Cats in the Cradle, and that that it's interesting how a chance meeting brings up so many emotions, and how when you're a young person you think life is going to be a certain way, and then it's not, because life happens to you, and as John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, in Beautiful Boy. And that's another musical reference, of course. And so, this is why numbers 5 and 4 are on my list. I love those two songs, and I think Harry Chapin is a fucking genius. Okay, now, in the way of fucking geniuses, we have a repeat performance by Billy Joel on our list in the number 3 spot. Ladies and gentlemen, a bottle of red, a bottle of white. It all depends upon your appetite. Scenes from an Italian restaurant. Number 3. Now, this is probably a very tri-state area specific song, as most of Billy Joel's songs are, because he's a Long Island guy. And, it could be the everyman story. It's not very, very New York or New Jersey specific, but it sort of is. And it's very decade specific, and it speaks to a certain time period. Brenda and Eddie were the popular steadies and the king and the queen of the prom, riding around with the car top down and the radio on. It tells the story of Brenda and Eddie, this young couple who, right out of high school, very cheerleader, football player-ish, popular, school people, were really cool and styling, and they were the hip, seniors or whatever, but then they got married. And everyone said they were crazy. Brenda, that you're much too lazy. And Eddie can never afford to live that kind of life. People said they were nuts, but they got married anyway. And they built themselves a little home. One of the most beautifully woven pieces of imagery I've ever heard in my life happens in that song. He says they got an apartment with deep pile carpets and a couple of paintings from Sears. A big waterbed that they bought with the bread they had saved for a couple of years. They started to fight when the money got tight, and they just didn't count on the tears. Well, of course, now the story goes on, and Brenda and Eddie get divorced. What is it? Couldn't go back to the greasers. The best they could do was pick up the pieces, and we always knew they would both find a way to get by. And it's basically the story of a broken teenage relationship, marrying too soon and not being ready for real responsibility, and then in middle age looking back upon it. And that's because the song is a framework song, right? And that's why I think it is a brilliant story. I mean, you can see Brenda and Eddie in your head. Here's the thing about story songs. If you are listening to the song and it tells such a story that you could cast it in your head, if you could see it in a movie, if you're like, oh yeah, Zac Efron could be that guy, or George Clooney could be that guy, or oh my God, how about Cameron Diaz? Is that, and you start thinking of celebrities and placing the movie in your head, then the songwriter has done a good job, because that it's not just dee 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 in a little tune, it's a story. They're telling you a narrative. Now, number 2 also makes me cry. Number 2 is extremely generational. It's not my generation. It is about generation and a half before me. Most people consider the first great rock and roll tragedy to be the late 50s plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. They call it the day the music died. And there's actually a memorial in Iowa, in the town, in the field where they crashed in the snow. And Waylon Jennings was supposed to have been on that plane, and he didn't go. And he said, "Oh, I hope your plane crashes." And he felt guilty that, till the end of his life. Is Waylon Jennings alive? I don't know. I like Waylon Jennings. I hope he's alive. And so, in any case, the day the music died is the theme of American Pie. Now, Weird Al Yankovic, who I'm a huge fan of, parodied the song called "The Saga Begins" about Star Wars. My, this here Anakin guy may be Vader someday later. Now he's just a small fry. he left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying, soon I'm going to be a Jedi. And my brother and I saw that live on July 29th of this year, the hottest day of the year, at Forest Hill Stadium. And God darn it, it was so good. Oh my God, I could cry. It was so wonderful.
A long, long time ago, in a galaxy far away, Naboo was under an attack. And Dazomi and Qui-Gon Jinn could talk the Federation into maybe cutting them a little slack. Their response, it didn't thrill us. They laughed at us and tried to kill us. We escaped from that gas, but met Jar Jar and Boss Nass. We took a bongo from the scene, and we went to Theed to see the Queen. We all wound up on Tatooine. That's where we found this boy. Oh my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader, someday Vader, now he's just a small fry. He left his home and kissed his mommy goodbye, saying soon I'm gonna be a Jedi. Soon I'm gonna be a Jedi.
But American Pie is the song we're talking about here. Okay, the second most incredible story song, to me, anyway. It tells the story of how the guy in the song found out about the plane crash, and he goes to various places. He says, I drove the Chevy to the levee, and the levee was dry, and good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing "This'll be the day that I die." And he goes and he listens, and he basically in the story goes place to place to he says he went to the store where he'd heard the music long before, and he's just wandering around and seeing different people's reactions to the situation, and it's less about the concept of 3 guys died in a plane crash, and it's more about the death of the hope of a generation, and how the homogenous society and the xenophobia and the very plastic 1950s gave way to the reality of the 60s. And the 60s, it held to the light incredibly important social issues, but also broke a lot of people and divided families. And 1968 alone, basically everybody who meant any good on the planet died. It's just a tumultuous time. And there's this video, and thank you to my good friend John for showing me this footage of Don McLean singing the song on stage, the long version. There's a radio edit that's 4 minutes long, but the long one. And at the end of the song, Don McLean, you could see tears. He's singing his own song. I'm sure he's heard it before. He performs it all the time. But it got to him, and you could see he was crying with his little guitar, and I was like, well, yeah, samesies, because it says everything you need to know about the death of the innocence of America and thrust us into the second half of the 20th century, and one of the finest lyrics I've ever heard written in my life appears at the end of that song. He says, "And the 3 men I admired most, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, they caught the last train for the coast, the day the music died." And we're supposed to believe that it's John F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, or there's like various variations. And actually, there's a wonderful, wonderful video that I'm going to link down below, in the description, that sort of explains it. I want to sort of take this song on as my little project and show it to you, even though it's not number 1. Now, it is at this place in the video, after we've had the number 2 song, let me put my cup aside here, that we get to the honorable mentions before I do number 1. I'm not going to do that this evening, and I'll tell you why. Because there are so many songs that I didn't cover. I started making an honorable mentions list. I couldn't. Where's the... Yeah, H, M. I couldn't even do it. It was too many. I was like, no, this is its own list. So what are we going to do, ladies and gentlemen? we're going to have part 2. Not sure if it's going to be next week or not. You let me know if you want to see it right away or if you want us to top 10 something else next Tuesday. Please, for God's sake, comment, because I am of two minds about this. I could totally go anyway. Okay, I'll make an executive decision if need be, but I really would appreciate your input because this is Linda's world. It's not Linda's dictatorship, you know? So you go right ahead and tell me. I really appreciate your input. About anything else on the list, of course. You've got a song you want to see on the top 10 stories? Well, you just go right ahead and comment. And now, ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, the drum roll. The number 1 song is a song that I play every single Thanksgiving day. It is a song that my dad introduced me to when I was 14, and I've never looked back. It is a song that I think is probably one of the most poignant stories that I've ever heard in my life. It's, again, extremely generational and not my generation. It was a movie. Remember how long ago I said in this video, 1,000 years ago when we started here, that that there was a movie to one of the songs? Well, this is it. Ladies and gentlemen, Arlo Guthrie, number 1 spot, Alice's Restaurant. I've been to Alice's Restaurant. I was in Northern California over the Christmas break of 2017, and on our way to San Francisco, where I stood at Haight-Ashbury. I stood at the corner of Haight-Ashbury, 50 years too late, but I was there. On our way, we also stopped at Alice's Restaurant, and I'll insert a pic because it was like one of my dreams in life made. Alice's Restaurant is a spoken song. The only thing he sings is, "You can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant. You can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant." Said, "Walk right in, it's around the back, just a half-mile from the railroad track. And you can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant." But that's not the point. Arlo Guthrie tells the story. He tells the story of how a couple of years ago he went to Thanksgiving at Alice's house. She has a restaurant and she lives in the church, and they had a lot of trash in the bottom of their home, you know, in the church pews, and so they picked up the trash, drove it to the dump. The dump was closed on Thanksgiving. They dumped it near more garbage. They got a phone call from a police officer who said, "We have to pick up the garbage. You're being arrested for littering." So they were arrested for littering, and they went in the cell. They had to pay $50 and pick up the garbage and so forth. And you're like, all right, well, what the heck do we care? Until the story kicks up. Because, you see, it also became his time to register for the draft. And he went to register for the draft in a building where, what does he say? You walked in, you get... I'm trying to remember. You walked in, you get inspected, neglected, infected, and selected. There's more of it, but I'm paraphrasing. So he fills out his forms, and he goes through all the things, and they ask him, "Have you ever been arrested?" And he has. So he writes, and he says he's sitting there on the bench with people who've committed violent crimes, and they're filling out their forms, and it's funny. He goes, they said, what do you get arrested for, kid? And I said, littering. And they all moved away from me on the bench until I said creating a nuisance, and then they all came back. And it's a comment on the irony of the fact that, an arrest for littering by trying to do a good deed for a friend on Thanksgiving Day by taking out their garbage may prevent you from going to a foreign country to drop napalm on children. You know what I mean? And so, he says, "Shrink, you got a lot of damn gall to ask me to burn women, kids, and villages, after being a litter bug, if I'm not moral enough to join the army after committing my crime." And I absolutely love when, and my dad used to go back and forth with me on this, the part where he's like, I walked into that shrink's office and I said, "Shrink, I want to kill. I want to kill." I said, "Kill, kill." We started jumping up and down, yelling, "Kill." And it was just so, the story, the timing of the story, the concept behind it, the very specific moment in what is now history, that song brings into the light. And it's amazing. So "Kid, have you rehabilitated yourself?" And he's like, I'm sitting here on the group W bench, with mother stabbers and father rapers, as he calls them, You know, because you're not sure if you're gonna send me to Vietnam because I was a litter bug, you know, like do you see the profound irony in that? You know, and he's like, and if he goes, if you want to end the war and stuff, you gotta sing the song, you know, and it's, you know, and everyone sings, you can get anything you want at Alice's restaurant and so forth. And the song takes a good 18 minutes to get through, and it is probably one of the most incredible. It's a very simple story, and it is probably one of the most drawn out songs ever on the radio. I'm sure DJs loved it because they can go pee twice because it's 18 minutes long. And it is the most perfect story to hold to the light the inequities and the civil rights violations and the incredible irony of the 1960s in America. And Arlo Guthrie, whose father was Woody Guthrie, who wrote "This Land Is Your Land," should, you know, I mean, it's perfect, and I could make a video just on that, but we're not going to do that today because we're at the end of the list. So this has been Top 10 Songs That Tell a Story. Top 10 story songs for our first Top 10 Tuesday. I have so many more that I just don't even know what to say. I told you we're having a part 2. Anyway, so, you know, here we are. We're pretty much gonna wrap up here. So, you know, I could talk all day, but you know what? This is a long enough video. So, if you like what you heard, and or if you did not like what you heard, or if you like some of it and you disagree with it, and you're like, oh, but what about the song or whatever? Like I said, please put it down in the comment section. I would love to hear from you. You know, like I've done a lot of meh tonight. I would like you to do some, and let me know, because like I said, I appreciate all feedback. I want to point out, by the way, that I got a couple of new subscribers today. I started the day at 38 and I wound up with 45, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you and the 38 that came before you. So thank you. And I would love it if you would watch these videos all the way through and check out the I guess the awesomeness of what is being said and learned here. I appreciate very much you sticking through this top 10 list, and I guarantee you that I will insert the proper footage at the proper times, and I will also give a couple of links at the bottom in the description box of this video that can sort of help you out to understand some of the things I've said here musically, especially and including what I said about American Pie. I'm not going to leave that out. So nevertheless, I'm going to end the video here and say thank you for tuning in to our first ever Top 10 Tuesday. And if there's a countdown that you'd like to see me put out there, you let me know. Doesn't have to be musical. Top 10 vacation spots, top 10, I don't know, stores to shop in, whatever floats your boat. You let me know some of your ideas for top 10s, and Top 10 Tuesday shall be. Anyway, I'm going to go now and I'm going to listen to some of the songs that I put on this list while I edit this video, because now I'm all jazzed up. So, this has been Top 10 Tuesdays. This has been Linda's World, and, well, if I had anything to say, I'd say music makes the people come together. That's Madonna, 2002. Have a good night.